They may have been here earlier before anybody else, but then they left. Then shows up, we show up, and you go, well, that's when they created everybody. It's not necessarily what I'm trying to get at here. What I'm trying to say is that there was this thing called an Adamic race that spawned the populations of the planet as we know now. Okay? So starting at that point, we had something develop historically on this planet. And it wasn't necessarily monarchical, it wasn't Anglo-Saxon, but primarily the idea of Anglo-Saxon monarchy is what I'm talking about. And so why would any of the peoples on this planet start a monarchy? You got to ask that question. Why? Well, you can go back in the histories of England and find out the first one, and so forth and all that kind of thing. But what if you are on this planet and these dudes show up and they start stealing your daughters, maybe even your wife, and taking them for their own and start having kids? And those giants are really jerks too. And they began to rule and create a lot of havoc. Well, that I'm going to tell you is why in secret, from the foundations of the origins of the cultures of the Anglo-Saxons, came this need to start a monarchical rule. Why? See, monarchs don't necessarily guarantee you're going to get the best ruler, right? In fact, you'll get a good one, then you'll get a bunch of bad ones, then you'll get a good one, then you'll get a bad one. And some of the bad ones are either just flat out incompetent and stupid, or they were like devilish, just mean. However, because of what had happened historically, ancient-wise, with these beings that came down called the first time, it was common knowledge when monarchical systems began that this was a battle of survival for the species that was not Anunnaki, because Anunnaki were mean and abusive to them. And when they ran out of food, they started eating the Englishmen. That's why we've got that poem that says, fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman, and that's from a giant going after him to eat him. We have a lot of Anglo-Saxon comments that have popped up since this interview Bill did. So let's talk about the monarchical system from the standpoint of the Anglo-Saxons only right now, because we could go a lot of places with this. It started so that the Nephilim, the Anunnaki, could not take political control of an established culture without, guess what, being in the bloodline. They didn't allow, like for example, the Anglo-Saxons didn't allow intermarrying, and they protected that bloodline. But let's not even get into the discussion of, well, that causes people to have defects and mental illness and so forth, because what I'm about ready to tell you is really different. You see, the bloodline had enough people in the pot that they were far enough from their sister and their immediate family that they could intermarry without causing that kind of problem. Now, there might be some people that were a little bit ignorant and didn't do it correctly, and that could have caused a problem. But they knew they had to keep at a distance. So their families would marry English into a German monarchy systems, to Spanish and French and so forth, and that kept those problems from happening. And those monarchical systems were kept pure from the Anunnaki also. Why would you do this? Well, this is to keep the Anunnaki from ruling. Now, you might have to say, well, these guys were just 30 foot tall and they just took a club and they just ruled by force. Originally, yes, because when they first were taking the women on the planet and having these kids, that's what they were, half human, half fallen Anunnaki, fallen angel, whatever you want to call them. And they were pretty good size. But as they began to intermarry again then with humans, their size began to get smaller and smaller, but not, their attitude was still stinky, so to speak. You know, they still fell pretty close to the tree, and their attitude still manifested some pretty wicked stuff, and that still is occurring today. But in order to protect the scorpion from doing what he just, was made to do, which was sting the frog because he was there, they kept the Anunnaki away from the ruling of their culture, of their nation, by putting a monarchical system that says you will not marry outside, you will not marry a Philistine, you will not marry a Hittite, you will not marry one of those giant cultures, from one of those cultures, and rule in this kingdom, or this nation, or this tribe. And then, on top of that, you will pass then the authority to protect your land and your people down to your oldest son, because then he then inherits this, and his job is described on this document that says, take care of your brothers and your sisters and give them land to live on. And by the way, to keep them, the bad guys, from voting themselves in, only landowners that are patriarchs can vote. It had nothing to do with trying to eliminate the woman. It had everything to do with protecting them and keeping the Anunnaki out of government. And so it has gone until such time that they were able to the last vestige of infiltration they could and did accomplish was the monarchical system. But prior to that, they infiltrated all the workings and trappings and all the support mechanisms around the monarchical kingdom, like the security and the sheriffs and the tax collectors and the banking systems, and they infiltrated that first, and then finally they were able to manifest actual takeover physically of the monarchies. And so today we get this picture of the Queen of England being a reptile. Why? Because she is. So the question is asked often of me, well, when did this happen? Well, and Queen Beatrice, it might have, in that monarchical line, it might have happened at a different time than England, and it might have happened at a different time in France and a different time in Spain, So each one of these nations, they all had their struggles with these people, with these beings, and some were more successful at getting in faster than others. So, "4 years old." Okay, I didn't know it was 4 years old. Just got a note that the tsunami was 4 years old. What was 4 years? About what I've just been talking about. What is not common knowledge, folks, that I'm about ready to tell you is the monarchical system is not common knowledge. Yes, it's been out for a long time, and I'm about ready to tell you how it got out and how it got protected. There is an organization that started because of more recent times, because they began to realize that the system, the modern 1900s, is what I'm talking